For decades, Phylicia Rashad was one of the most admired figures in American television. She became a beloved presence in homes around the world as a dignified, warm, and brilliant Claire Huxtable on The Cosby Show. That sitcom was more than just comedy, it was a cultural landmark. Millions of people saw on screen a strong, educated black family filled with love, respect, laughter, and real-life challenges handled with dignity. Parents talked about it with their children, teachers mentioned it in classrooms, and fans praised it for breaking stereotypes. Rashad's performance was a large part of why the show became such a classic. She brought softness, strength, and intelligence to her character, making Claire someone people looked up to, connected with, and trusted. For years, fans associated her not just with the series, but with a kind of hope that television could show real families with real heart, and that black excellence could be center stage. This love and respect grew over time, and many people remember The Cosby Show first as comfort and second as a shift in how black families were seen on television. However, the legacy of The Cosby Show became complicated in ways that many fans did not expect. Over the course of years, many women came forward with allegations that Bill Cosby, the creator and star of the show, had committed sexual assault. These claims erupted into public view long after the series had ended. At first, many viewers felt disbelief because The Cosby Show was so cherished. They had carried these happy memories for years, and soon found themselves facing something much darker that shook that foundation. As shocking as it was for the audience, it was also a personal and professional crossroads for the actors and creators who had worked closely with Cosby, including Phylicia Rashad. For Rashad, this moment was not just about television history. It became a moment of truth, reflection, and reckoning with what the world would remember and what she personally believed. Rashad shared a long history with Cosby before the controversy reached a media storm. Their connection was more than just co-workers. They were colleagues in art, part of the same circles, and shared creative respect. Cosby was not only her co-star but also someone she worked beside in live performances, interviews, and promotional events throughout the show's success. Like many others in Hollywood, she described him in the early years as a mentor, a collaborator, and a creative force who helped shape one of the most successful sitcoms of its time. Their relationship was defined by years of partnership and public appreciation, and this long past made the later controversy all the more complex for her. But when allegations from dozens of women emerged and were covered widely in the press, the world perception of Cosby changed drastically. That change also placed pressure on those who knew him, professionally or personally, to respond. Rashad, like others who worked with Cosby, had to choose how to navigate this moment. The situation was not simple because the accusations had legal complexities as well as emotional weight for survivors. The public watched as different figures took different stances. Some offered support to the accusers. Some questioned the allegations, and some hesitated in the face of a complicated legal battle that in 2018, Cosby was convicted of sexual assault in a Pennsylvania court. This verdict shocked many and was seen by some as long-awaited justice for the women who had spoken out. But the story did not end there. In 2021, the state Supreme Court overturned that conviction due to procedural and legal technicalities, not because the allegations were disproven on their facts. This legal reversal became a huge national discussion, dividing public opinion in a dramatic way. Many celebrated the decision as correct under law, while others saw it as a painful setback for survivors of abuse everywhere. It was amid this climate that Phylicia Rashad made comments that would draw both attention and criticism. Rashad posted on social media that she believed a terrible wrong was being righted by the overturning of Cosby's conviction, describing the moment as a correction to an injustice. In those early reactions, she expressed relief and spoke in terms that immediately struck many as supportive of Cosby's legal outcome. For fans who had spent years processing the allegations and the conviction, her message felt tone-deaf, hurtful, and dismissive of the lived experiences of those who said they had been harmed. At its core, the response from many observers was emotional and deeply personal. Survivors, their families, and allied groups voiced outrage. Saying a word seemed to prioritize the legal fate of an accused abuser over the pain of those who said they had suffered. The public reaction to Rashad's initial statement was swift and intense. People took to social media, news comment sections, and public forums to express how offended or disappointed they were. Many felt that as a respected public figure, her views carried influence, and that this influence should not be used in a way that seemed to marginalize women who had spoken up about trauma. Many fans wrote that they felt betrayed because a person they associated with kindness and compassion on screen seemed to dismiss survivors' voices in real life. Others said Rashad had every right to her point of view, but that she should have been more careful and sensitive in how she expressed it. Within days of the blowback, Rashad issued a clarification and apology. She acknowledged that her words had hurt people, and that many of those people were survivors of sexual violence. She explained that her earlier message was meant to reference legal procedure and the specifics of the court's decision, and that she did not intend to minimize or discredit any survivor's experience. Rashad said she opposed sexual violence in all forms and expressed deep regret for the pain her comments caused. She publicly stated that she wished she had communicated her thoughts in a clearer, more thoughtful way. This apology, however, was not a simple fix. While some people appreciated her attempt to clarify, others still felt that the initial sentiment was revealing of deeper issues. For many, the reaction was not just about a momentary choice of words, but about the deeper question of how powerful figures respond when one of their own is accused of harm. Critics asked, should close personal or professional ties ever blind someone to the suffering of others, especially in situations involving abuse and trauma? They argue that even a legal victory does not erase the stories of real people who say they were harmed. Supporters of Rashad, though, defended her right to speak from a perspective and emphasized that legal principles, like due process, are separate from the emotional reality of survivors. This debate highlighted a complicated truth about public figures and public statements, that context matters deeply, and that words are often interpreted as signals about personal values, beyond legal interpretation. Rashad's clarification focused on the legal aspects of Cosby's conviction being overturned, but many viewers were more concerned with the emotional and moral implications of supporting someone who had been accused by many. The conflict became not only about what was legally correct, but about what was socially and ethically sensitive in a moment when discussions about abuse and accountability were at the forefront of public consciousness. What made the situation even more difficult was the fact that The Cosby Show was not just another sitcom. It was one of the most influential shows in television history. For countless fans, it represented uplift, joy, familial warmth, and cultural pride. Seeing that show connected to an accused abuser created a cognitive dissonance that many viewers struggled to reconcile. When Rashad, an icon of that show, weighed in on the controversy, it made the connection sharper and more personal for audiences who had spent years seeing her as a symbol of hope on their screens. The controversy, and Rashad's role in it, sparked wider discussions about how we separate artists from their art. Some argued it is possible to appreciate the positive impact of a television show while recognizing that people involved may have serious flaws or allegations against them. Others said that the harm inflicted on survivors should always overshadow any cultural legacy. Many people found themselves sitting somewhere in between, trying to hold both perspectives at once, to honor the good that the Cosby Show brought into the world while refusing to diminish the suffering of those who said they had been harmed. Rashad, caught in the center of this debate, became a symbol of how complex and uncomfortable that reckoning can be today as time has passed. Phylicia Rashad has continued her career as an actress, teacher, and respected voice in the arts. But the moment of controversy remains part of how many people see her legacy. She has said that she stands against sexual violence and has apologized for any comments that hurt people, but the emotional impact of her initial response remains in the minds of many fans and survivors. Some continue to praise her work and separate her from the controversy, while others still view her stance as problematic or insensitive. For Rashad herself, this period was a moment of reflection and tension between personal loyalty, public responsibility, and the evolving conversations about justice and trauma in society. It forced a deeper examination not just of one man's legacy, but of how we respond collectively to allegations of abuse, how we support survivors, and how public figures navigate emotional and legal complexities under intense scrutiny. Looking at all of this now, years later, people can see that Rashad's situation was not an isolated fault, but a reflection of larger cultural questions. The world is still learning how to handle the intersections of celebrity, power, accountability, and empathy, and how to talk about difficult topics without diminishing anyone's pain. For fans of The Cosby Show, the emotional journey from joyful nostalgia to controversial truth has been long and complicated. For Rashad, the journey has shown how even beloved public figures must face consequences in conversations when the world asks hard questions about morality, empathy, and history. No matter how people feel about her comments or her apology, Phylicia Rashad's name will remain in the middle of one of television's most complicated legacies. Her confession about the darker truth surrounding the Cosby Show was not a simple statement, but part of a much larger cultural reckoning that continues to unfold. It reminds us that the people we admire on screen are human, that public statements carry weight, and that forgiveness, understanding, and accountability are all difficult to balance when the past and present collide. Millions will always remember Claire Huxtable as a symbol of wisdom and strength, but the real wisdom that this moment calls for is the ability to hear the pain in the world as deeply as we hear the praise. Still today, when people talk about the Cosby Show, they often speak in two voices at once. One voice remembers the laughter, the warmth of the Huxtable living room, the inspirational parenting style, and the way Claire and Cliff encouraged education, dignity, and love. The other voice remembers the pain of what came after, the allegations, the legal battles, and the difficult conversations that shook a generation's faith in a beloved cultural icon. These two voices pull at fans, critics, and observers alike, forcing them into emotional tension. For many people, this tension is not something that can be quickly resolved. Instead, it becomes a long process of sorting through memory, meaning, and how we value art versus the moral behavior of people behind that art. For Phylicia Rashad, this moment became deeply personal. Her role in the show was iconic, and for years she embraced that role with pride. But when the controversy around Cosby reached public crisis and then legal reversal, Rashad found herself answering questions she never expected. Suddenly, the conversations she had to navigate were not about her acting technique or her advice for young performers. Instead, she was drawn into discussions about justice, power, trauma, and loyalty. These are heavy topics for anyone to discuss privately, let alone someone in the public eye whose words are immediately broadcast, dissected, and debated by millions. Rashad was forced to reconcile her personal views with the intense public reaction, and this process was painful for many sides. It involved not only her own internal struggle, but also the feedback and emotional responses from the broader community that in the wake of the criticism she received. Rashad often expressed that she never intended to diminish the voices of survivors. She defended her legal concern as separate from the moral reality of sexual violence. This distinction between legal procedure and moral certainty is thick with complexity. Many observers understood that the legal reversal was technical, based on how evidence was handled by prosecutors many years earlier, and not a statement that Cosby was innocent in fact. But for survivors and supporters, the emotional impact of the reversal felt like erasure, especially when public figures celebrated the outcome. In their view, legal technicalities do not erase the lived experiences of women who shared trauma, pain, and courage in coming forward. This clash between legal interpretation and emotional truth became a vivid example of how society struggles to talk about abuse, accountability, and support for survivors. People who felt hurt by Rashad's initial message didn't simply disagree with her perspective. They felt as though someone with influence had minimized suffering at a moment when survivors were hoping for empathy, validation, and cultural solidarity. For many, that is where the heart of the controversy remained. It was not about legal theory alone. It was about whether the world of fame and power can be trusted to treat survivors with dignity when the accused is someone they admire or respect. The distance between the Cosby Show's fictional family and the reality of the controversy also sparked broader debates and media criticism. These debates ask whether iconic art can be separated from the personal behavior of its creators. Some advocates asserted that the show's impact on representation and culture should stand apart from the latest scandal, insisting that the fictional Huxtables deserve appreciation on their own terms. Others argued that once harmful behavior is revealed, especially behavior that aligns with the world of power and celebrity, the art cannot be fully enjoyed without context. This argument challenged fans to hold two ideas at once: appreciate the cultural positive influence on representation and recognize that abusive behavior cannot be made invisible by nostalgia. As public discussions continued, voices from all sides emerged: survivors, journalists, entertainers, cultural critics, and everyday fans. Some wrote essays defending Rashad, arguing that her view was misinterpreted and that she was advocating for fairness under the law, a principle important in any just society. Others responded that fairness under law must not overshadow compassion for survivors. Still others asked whether celebrities owe a different standard of sensitivity because their words carry such wide reach. All of these questions went beyond the personal situation of Rashad and became larger cultural questions about how society balances justice, empathy, and respect in public speech. With time, Rashad continued her work in theater, education, and public appearance. She returned to roles that honored her craft, teaching young artists to perform with authenticity, emotional clarity, and moral depth. In interviews years later, she often spoke about her life as a whole, the joy of performance, the respect she holds for the discipline of her profession, and the recognition that life does not always unfold in simple black and white terms. For Rashad, this period became part of her personal story, a chapter that taught her about the weight of public words and the necessity of listening deeply, especially to voices that carry the pain of lived experience. This personal reflection also mirrors a broader cultural pattern. As society evolves, public figures are increasingly expected to respond not only with facts but with sensitivity. The era in which a celebrity could simply make a statement and move on has shifted. Audiences today often demand accountability, empathy, and the acknowledgement of harm where harm exists. This cultural shift means that moments of controversy like the one Rashad faced become learning points for both public figures and the public at large about how to handle discussions of trauma and memory in a respectful, thoughtful way. Thousands of essays, social media threads, academic articles, and opinion pieces have been written about the Cosby Show controversy and Rashad's role in the public conversation. Some view her as an unfortunate example of how influencers can speak without fully grasping the pain of others. Others see her as someone whose intentions were good, even if her delivery was poor or misread. The spectrum of responses underscores how different people approach issues of justice, memory, trust, and legacy. This spectrum also highlights how cultural moments can expose deep emotional currents in society, currents shaped by history, representation, trauma, and hope. For many individuals who grew up watching The Cosby Show, the emotional journey has been long. Early memories of laughter and comfort give way to confusion, grief, reflection, and, for some, a re-evaluation of what it means to admire a show while acknowledging that real people connected to it have complicated stories. This re-evaluation is not simplistic. It is messy, emotional, and ongoing. It teaches fans that the impact of art is real, and that the impact of human suffering is also real, and that the two can coexist in difficult tension. In the end, Phylicia Rashad's experience reveals something profound about our collective culture. It shows that when beloved shows collide with real-world harm, the conversation is never only about television. It becomes a conversation about humanity, empathy, justice, and the courage it takes to hear truths that are painful. Rashad's clarification and apology were important steps in addressing the controversy, but the cultural ripple they created will continue to influence how society talks about abuse, loyalty, and influence in the years to come. Millions will always remember their favorite characters, but the world is learning that behind those characters are real people, real pain, and real responsibility. And while time moves forward,